Greetings, everyone. This is the Hipster Snek. And for this Snek Talk, I wanted to do something a little bit different in order to sign off on the merry month of Mons games. As you might have guessed by now, I love monster games. I mean, obviously, right? So to finish out the month, I want to talk about a hypothetical game, a dream monsters game, and what it would look like if I was responsible for it. You know, time, money, and obvious lack of talent not being actual detriments here. In my weird monster RPG, I'd want the monsters broken up into families, sort of like what Digimon does, rather than have them be, oh, this is a direct elemental line, and this family always evolves into this creature over here. I'd rather it be like, oh, we have like creatures that fall into the dragon family, things that are like the insect family, and so on and so forth. And yeah, there would need to be an elemental table, because like what RPG doesn't have one of those. But I want some really kind of like quirky elements, like how Trials of Mana, Secret of Mana have wood and moon in addition to like fire, water, and earth. I think things like that would be a really good way to not only establish a series identity, but to also make the gameplay a little more nuanced, have people like pay attention to what the elements actually are. I'm kind of thinking a turn-based RPG with a team of at least 3, though I'd really prefer 4 or 5. I like larger parties. If you make it much bigger than that, you kind of go into SRPG territory, which hypothetically speaking is kind of cool, but I'd rather it stay a turn-based RPG with elements of like Mega Man X Command Mission and Super Mario RPG, giving it some more real-time flexibility in the combat system. That way the player is always engaged, even if they're just grinding. But it's not so overly complicated you're effectively just playing an action game. Oh, and your avatar, which would be the human, it would need to be customizable. I mean, like how MMORPGs allow you to customize in like insane degrees, however you want your character to look. It needs to be like that. And at least Tim levels of fashionista, if not more. I'm kind of imagining a thing where when you're like on your ranch or whatever, you'll have a way of interacting with your monsters kind of akin to how Fane does in Monster Rancher 4, where you can just walk right up to them, like pet them on the head or give them food. Things like that I think would be a really good way of making it a meaningful connection between you and your monsters, even ones that aren't necessarily the meta option. You can at least like bond with them in a way. I think it would make the whole thing more personable. On top of that, if the game devs were worried about length, I think what you should have is a system of tags where you can earn or buy additional tags. Like, oh, you could have a tag for dragons, or you could have a tag for like fire creatures. And maybe not prevent you from raising them, but like you won't get the most out of them unless you have those tags. Maybe have a sort of like the license tables in Final Fantasy 12 in Zodiac Age, where you can gradually grow out from like a central point and get more immediately related things to what you start with. Because I'm kind of thinking obtaining the monsters needs to be an adventure. It can't be as simple as use item on critter and just get the creature. Like, I think maybe you should start with a loner monster, which may in some way impart freebie tags the player starts the game with. And you'll need to raid like a temple or ruins or something. I'm kind of thinking like how the saucer stones are treated in the Monster Rancher anime, how they're like actually these lost things, this lost civilization. You need to find crystals or seeds or something interesting like that to give the way you get your monster some personality. I think there should be smaller dungeons that are random or procedurally generated in order to find some more monsters and a way to grind your adventure experience, which I really liked that from Monster Rancher 4, where going on adventures was another way of training up your creatures in addition to earning money. And then there should be larger preset dungeons that are actually like handcrafted for story events or special creatures, or like can only be found in this one particular dungeon kind of thing. And maybe a way for like common monsters, like maybe they're available in a store, or maybe you can get some common monsters. If you fight a certain amount of them, they drop like crystal shards or something. And if you assemble a full crystal, you can summon one of their species, kind of like how recent Digimon titles handle recruitment. Something like that would be good, and that way the player would never be without at least a handful of options right off the bat. I'm imagining that you would need to kind of alternate between these adventures, and there should also be a tournament structure, pretty much like your big moneymaker would actually be like participating in monster battles, and maybe have various mini games. Take elements from like Monster Racer, for instance. Not something you absolutely have to do, rather something that could just be fun in a way of earning money on the side, something just to to kill time when you're tired of progressing the main storyline. You gotta have something like the Gold Saucer from like Final Fantasy 14 is a good example of this. Some way to blow off steam when you just want to kind of mess around with your monsters and see what they can do. Oh, and speaking of Final Fantasy 14, you gotta have some kind of minor online component. That just seems to be like a prerequisite nowadays. But I think a really good way of integrating this is have a reserve slot in your party where an NPC ally can have a monster, or if you have like a friends list or something like if on Steam, for instance, you could have monsters from your friends' save files as a backup, like a fifth creature in your party for a ringer. Something like that to kind of encourage a strong PvE focus and really like a co-op play, kind of like what Tim does. Like somehow, some way to break up the party 2 and 2 and then like a support maybe. Have something like that, like 5 monsters on the field, but you have some combination, designate one as a leader and do 3 and 2, for instance. Something like that to really encourage cooperation. That was actually a thing that Warframe has always done that I've always really liked, that I think could be easily incorporated into this kind of game. As for the monsters themselves, I think that they should be able to evolve, but it can't be a linear evolution. It needs to be sort of like Digimon, where you get the options of like, oh, this one creature can like branch off into all these other creatures. Maybe only have 3 tiers, make it a little bit more succinct, kind of like how class changing in Trials of Mana is such a meaningful event for your character. Have some kind of a standardization to it, so you're not constantly looking up a guide. Oh, to have this creature evolve, you have to set your PC on fire and turn it on its side. Yeah, nothing like that. Keep it as simple and straightforward as possible so that it's not completely obtuse kind of thing. Oh yeah, speaking of, I'd strongly prefer it to be released on PC, because paying for online is literally one of the dumbest, most underhanded tactics that console developers have ever come up with. It's stupid and it's dumb, and I will not support it. So it would need to be, pretty much need to be on PC. I don't think there's any other way to do it nowadays. Technicals aside, that's sort of what I had in mind. And in terms of story, I would think of something like the major plot theme needs to be humans and monsters are better together. And to wish to separate them is inherently wrong, regardless of how well-meaning the motivation to do so might be. Also, societal technological evolution cannot come to a crashing halt on account of the creatures. That's stupid and counterproductive, because you got to find a way to strike the best balance between civilization and nature without one completely overruling the other just because, oh, we got to have those, mid-90s environmentalism PSAs. I really feel like that could actually make a great villain for the story, but I'd really need to sit down and flesh out a more distinct story so that I'm not just riffing on those idiotic environmental ads at the end of the Ninja Turtles. Yeah, and that's sort of what my monster game would look like if I had the time and resources to make one. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and let me know what you thought about the Month of Mons games as a whole. For me, it was a lot of fun. This was actually a great kick of inspiration for me, and I know that a lot of my fellows have been looking forward to it and seeing what all I would do with it. And if this is popular enough, I'd love to do it again next year. There's Mons games coming out all the time. A lot of really good NDX obscure reviews and Snek suites to be done with that. All right, everyone, this has been the Hipster Snek signing off for the month of May, and I'll see you next week with more obscure games. I'll see you there.